All right, folks, welcome back. So you have your rats back with you today, and so we're going to be continuing the dissection that we started last time. So last time we did the thoracic cavity. Today we're going to be doing the abdominal cavity. And so essentially it's the same basic idea as what we did before. However, we don't have to start with a scalpel this time because we've already started our cuts. So we are going to take our scissors and we're going to be cutting through the skin straight down the abdominal cavity. And we're just trying to get the skin. We don't want to get the actual muscles yet. If you do cut into the muscles, it's not a huge deal because we will be doing that eventually, but we want to stick with the skin as much as possible. And you're going to be going down to about the urethra. You can see his urethra is right down here. And then once you get there, you're going to be cutting across to his legs. And just like before, I'm going to pull out and break his legs. You heard those clicks, those were his legs breaking, and that just helps to open them up further. And then we're going to cut the skin across, down, below, like that, okay? So I'm going to extend on the other side here, but I can't very well with the camera, so I'm just going to show you on this side. Just like before, we're going to be pulling back that skin and push down on the muscle with your other hand to kind of hold it in place. And this helps us to skin the rat, holding it open, okay? And so we're going to do the other side, and I'll be right back. All right, folks, so we have finished skinning the abdominal cavity. So you can see the skin flaps are down this way. You are welcome, if you need to go ahead and put a T-pin in there. Mine are skinned enough that they're just going to stay flopping down there, so I'm not really worried about it. But what we need to do now is we need to open up the abdominal cavity. Now, I want you to be very careful about this, because remember we talked about last time that there is the diaphragm here that is separating the abdominal and the thoracic cavities. You can see how squishy this is. This is filled with a lot of fluid. And so this fluid is going to come out once we open this up. Because I did not break my diaphragm when I did the thoracic cavity dissection, it is intact. And so because of that, I'd like to start my cuts down here instead of up here, because I'd like to keep it intact as much as possible to be able to see what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pinch up the tissue a little bit and make a small cut with my scissors like this, and then get my scissors in there and cut down, and you see all that fluid that's flowing as soon as I'm making that cut. Okay, there's a lot of fluid in that abdominal cavity. All right, so that's not a problem. And then once I'm done cutting that way, I'm going to extend the cut directly up, and this is a lot easier to cut than the thoracic cavity was. I'm not going to cut all the way to the top though, because I do want to keep that diaphragm intact. Once I'm almost to the top, I'm actually going to go back down the side, okay? Because we want to see that diaphragm intact if we can, okay? And then I'm going to be able to put it as a flap over with the skin flap. Again, if you want to or need to use a T-pin, you are welcome to do that to hold it open. And we're just going to do the same thing with the other side, and I'll be right back. All right, folks, so we've opened him up here, and we can see all of the inner portions of his abdominal cavity. What I'm going to go ahead and do is, because you do see there's still a lot of fluid there, I'm going to tip him off to the side and let some of that drain out. Okay? And so we're just draining some of that so it's not quite as messy inside of here. And so now we need to start identifying some of these things. Now keep in mind, just like the heart, he has basically all the same structures as a human, just in different locations and proportions. For instance, all of these lobes right here that span the entire anterior portion of the abdominal cavity are all his liver. In humans, we only have the liver on the right side, and it moves slightly towards the center. It does not span the entire thing. However, this is all liver. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lobes of his liver. Okay, quite large. All right. Now, you also see that there is some connective tissue here. I'm just going to break it with my probe. And hopefully, I don't know how well you can see, this here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pick him up a little bit and tip him. And you see that membrane there. This right here. That is the diaphragm. And that diaphragm is what separates the abdominal cavity from the thoracic cavity. You can see right now it's still perfectly intact, but we are about to break it, so I wanted to make sure you saw that really nicely first. Okay? Now, it's separating the two cavities, but that's not its main purpose. Its main purpose is in respiration. Remember, this is the muscle that is going to move up and down to allow you to breathe. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put our rat friend back down here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of pull up here on the liver. And we can see that there's a couple large structures here. Now, it's tricky to know what is what because it's all in kind of a different spot. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to do something called running the bowels. And we're going to start pulling out all of these intestines here. Because all of this wrinkly stuff is intestines. So we can figure out what is the small intestine and what's the large intestine. Okay? But this large pouch here that seems to be directly underneath, this is the stomach. Okay? So this right here is his stomach. And it's roughly a U shape, okay? And it is directly under the liver. There's a larger pouch over here, but that is actually part of the large intestine further down, okay? So to make things a little bit easier, again, just using my fingers, I'm going to start to pull out his liver. I'm going to try to carefully keep the diaphragm intact as much as possible, but it will probably rip. Okay, so that's one lobe of his liver that I just pulled out. I'm going to yank out another lobe and another one and another one. Now when you're yanking these out, kind of feel them a little bit. They're rubbery, they're a little spongy, but they're fairly solid, okay? So when you're just feeling that like that, just to feel the consistency. Then kind of squeeze his stomach. You can feel it's definitely a different consistency. This one feels like it's full of stuff, okay? And I still have quite a bit of fluid here, so I'm going to go ahead and tip some more to get that fluid out because we want to be able to see what's going on in here, okay? And I have a little bit more liver to pull out, and there we go. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the diaphragm again because here's the important thing about this diaphragm. You see the diaphragm here is intact, and this here is your esophagus. Your esophagus has a special hole in the diaphragm that allows it to poke through so that the food can get from your mouth down to your stomach. Okay? So that is the esophagus right there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our scissors and we are going to cut the esophagus. Okay? Now, we do this because, as I said, we're going to run the bowels. So we want to lightly, with our fingers, separate the stomach from the posterior abdominal cavity. And in doing so, we found another lobe of the liver. And behind the stomach, we found another structure. This kind of moon-shaped structure here, this is not a lobe of the liver. I'm going to put them side by side here for a second. You can see that they're both smooth, and we found so many lobes of the liver, it looks kind of the same, except for you can see it's slightly darker. Okay? So that darker color and the shape here tells us that this is actually the spleen. Okay? The spleen is darker because its main job is to clean your blood. Okay? So it was hiding behind the stomach, and I'm going to go ahead and carefully, there we go, and I'm just doing this with my fingers, pulling up, and now I have the stomach released, okay? So again, you can see it has kind of a U shape to it. And now what we're going to do, as I said, is run the bowels. So we're going to carefully just continue to pull up, and as we pull up, we are allowing the bowels to unravel in our hands, okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put that all into my hand here. So essentially at this point, I have the stomach attached to virtually all of the small intestine, okay? Now remember, the small intestine has 3 parts to it. You remember what they're called? The duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, okay? Now, there is no way to know macroscopically, looking at it like this, which parts are which. It's just not going to happen. We just know that all of this is small intestine, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put all that down for a second, and we're going to continue on. And you see this much larger section here. It's about the same size as the stomach. It's quite large. And so some of you may have initially confused this for the stomach, but you can see it's much further down in the intestines. This is actually the first part of the large intestine. You guys remember what the first part of the large intestine is called? The cecum. The cecum is fairly small in humans compared to what we have here. I mean, it's bigger than this, but in comparison. And then after that, I'm going to pull up just a little bit more. At least I think I am. It's being a little stubborn. There we go. So there's only a little bit of large intestine afterwards. So the cecum here and the large intestine, that is everything we have here for the colon. And then it's going to be a little difficult to see, but it goes down deep here, and that would be the rectum, which ends up opening up into the anus, where you're going to release your stool, okay? All right, so that finishes the digestive system. Now, here's one thing I'm going to ask you guys to do, and I'm not going to show you what the answer is. We're going to just look at it together in class. What I'm going to want you to do next is take your stomach, and you are going to snip on your stomach to open it up, and then you're going to squeeze the contents of your stomach out onto your tray, okay? Then you're going to come all the way down here to the end of the large intestine. You're going to cut it off, and then you're going to squeeze some of what's here onto the tray next to what was in the stomach. And I want you to look at the contents and compare what was in the stomach to what was in the large intestine. And we want to see if there's any difference in texture, color, things like that, okay? I'm not going to show you because I want you to look at what the difference is on your own rats, okay? So that is it for today's dissection, and I will see you guys next time.